Now, welcome back to the stage, Mr. Chris Lidner, 2016 Excalibur Chairman.
Good morning again. How was breakfast? It's good. It amazes me how they can prepare a breakfast for this many people and every single plate tastes the same. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker tonight. I didn't go to bed, so it is still night for me. Marc B. Lautenbach is currently President and Chief Executive Officer at Pitney Bowes Incorporated. Marc was appointed President and CEO in December of 2012. Before joining Pitney Bowes, Marc spent 27 years at IBM. Actually has a lot of ties to Atlanta. We found that out last night at the VIP reception. Marc's tenure at IBM included senior positions leading the consulting and systems integration businesses in North America, sales in the Americas, and leading the small, medium businesses globally. In addition, Marc held senior positions at IBM Asia Pacific. Marc was elected to the board of directors at Campbell Soup Company in June of 2014. He is also a member of Catalyst and a member of the board of trustees at Denison University. Marc graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa at Denison University and went on to receive an MBA at the Kellogg Graduate School of Management from Northwestern University. I want to say this because I met Marc last night. He is genuinely a nice man. So I'm so proud to introduce you to Marc Lautenbach. And so please join me in welcoming Marc to the stage.
Thanks. Great. You bet. Good morning. Good morning. Chris, I'm wondering how you were able to figure out that all of the plates tasted the same in such a short amount of...
I'm the executive taster.
Executive taster, excellent. I'm delighted to be with you this morning. In many ways, coming to Atlanta is like coming home. As Chris mentioned, we lived in Atlanta off and on for about 10 years. We were punctuated by a couple of trips, one to Tampa and then to Tokyo. But in many ways, we did and we continue to consider Atlanta home. So it's really nice to be back. I was able to sustain my ties to Atlanta when I moved to New York with IBM because I spoke Southern. So I look around this room and I see many great companies, Equifax, and Manhattan Associates and Coke and others that I've had the good fortune of sustaining a relationship with for a long period of time. So it's great to be back. My topic this morning is transformations. I come to you with a fair amount of humility about this particular topic. A couple of statistics which I continue to find sobering, which I think puts the challenge in perspective. McKinsey did a piece of work recently that said only 30% of transformations reach their business objectives. 30%. If you put it in a technology context, and as I look around the room, I see some of you who might be able to remember this, but certainly not everyone. When I began with IBM in 1985, our principal competitors were Wang, Digital, Compaq, Unisys, Burroughs, Hitachi, and Bell. Interesting list. Interesting list. It is a stark reminder of how difficult transformations are. And the transformation at Pitney Bowes is nowhere near complete. While at IBM, I had the good fortune to see IBM transform itself probably 2 times while I was there in those 27 years. And then as I was running our consulting business, I had the opportunity to work with many companies who were on the same journey. So my own personal journey at Pitney Bowes began on September 14th, 2012. I had left IBM a few days earlier. Tino, I'm reminded of advice I got as I was leaving IBM, which was about my wife, who's sitting in the audience, and that was, I married you for better or worse, but not for lunch. So my respite was rather brief. My first interview with Pitney Bowes was 3 days later, September 14th. The next 60 days were fascinating in the sense that the board really knew everything they wanted to know about me. What they were most curious about was what I would do with the company, where I would take the company. So I studied Pitney Bowes, everything I could get my hands on, everything that was in the public domain, and it's fascinating. It is a fascinating company with some very unique capabilities. All this culminated in my final set of interviews on November 17th. So I remember these dates because every Thanksgiving we go to Florida. So this particular Thanksgiving, my family had left before me, and I was sitting at home on a Saturday night preparing for this interview on Sunday morning, and I was reading one of my favorite business books, Good to Great. I'm not sure if you've ever had the opportunity to read the book Good to Great, one of my favorite books, written by Jim Collins around 1999. And the thesis of the book was pretty simple. It was that good companies were commercially successful. Great companies were commercially successful, but were predicated on a set of values that allowed them to sustain their culture and their business going forward. So I was reading this book, and it was based on the stories of 12 companies. One of those companies was Pitney Bowes, 1999. So as I was joining Pitney Bowes, I saw a much different company. I saw a company whose stock price had gone from 60 to 10, who bonds were trading as junk, that was beleaguered for many of the reasons that Caesar pointed to, and I'll come back to that. Snail mail, as it was called and continued to be called, was under threat and secular decline from digital technologies. A similar and reoccurring theme in many different industries. But this story was not unique to Pitney Bowes. When I joined IBM in the 1980s, in August, there was an article on the front page of Time magazine titled, IBM, the Colossus That Works. IBM, the Colossus That Works, 1983, August. The theme of the article was, again, pretty simple. IBM had a manifest destiny. It could do no wrong. Its biggest problems were what to do with all of its cash and settling its antitrust suit with the Department of Justice for the charges of being a monopoly. 9 short years later, 1992, a much different article, this time on the cover of Fortune magazine, about IBM. This time IBM was paired with 2 other iconic companies, Sears and General Motors, that were likely to fail in the conclusion of this particular article. And if they didn't fail, they were certainly going to be irrelevant. Remember, in 1983, IBM's biggest problem was what to do with all of its cash. In 1992, we were factoring our receivables to make payroll. It reminds you how quickly things change in the world of technology, for the negative, but also for the positive. So I was fortunate enough to receive an offer to join Pitney Bowes as the president and CEO, and it's within this context that I joined the company. That was on November 17th. On November 30th, before I was named, I sat down with my predecessor at a hotel in Greenwich, Connecticut, and he gave me an hour-and-a-half lecture on how snail mail worked in the United States. It's a fascinating case study if you ever really want to fall asleep before breakfast or dinner. And he concluded his remarks by, that business is going to go away sooner or later, and we have this great new technology around digital mailboxes. We called it volley at the time. And his conclusion at the end of breakfast was either volley works, digital mailboxes work, or Pitney Bowes has no future. Interesting. That wasn't exactly in my briefing book from the board, nor was it obvious to me in my research. So I joined Pitney Bowes on December 3rd. And as is true in most leadership journeys, the first 100 days were instructive. So the first morning was particularly interesting. I was working with who would have been my secretary at the time to organize my announcement with my predecessor. And I said, what time does Pitney Bowes get started in the morning? So we get started around 9:30. I said, 9:30? Wow, I'm on my fourth meeting and almost having lunch by then. So we did, for all kinds of reasons, have that announcement meeting at 7:30 in the morning. And in a small way, it was to signify that we were going to change. We were going to change. So I walk into this very ornate conference room. They called it the boardroom, with 12 people who were going to be the senior leadership team. And it was probably one of the most cold receptions I've ever had in my entire life. What I knew a little bit at the time, but was to learn subsequently, 5 of the 12 people in that room thought they were going to be sitting in that chair. So I was the proverbial skunk in the room. So there was actually one other person on the senior team. She didn't show up for the first 2 weeks because she was crying at home. So it kind of gives you a sense of what I walked into. But after I got through that, what was a rather unusual and striking first day, the next 100 days were instructive. The first thing I found was in the top right-hand drawer, as you're kind of looking through what kind of documents are around, I found this incredible study from Boston Consulting Group. And it was, like most Boston Consulting Groups, a very thoughtful piece of work, great analysis, came through with a very clear prescription of what the company had to do. In many ways, it was eerily similar to what I told the board I would do 2 weeks earlier. The date of the study was 2009. 2009. So this was a company that didn't know they needed to change. They knew that the markets they were participating in were going through secular decline. It wasn't even a company that didn't know what the changes were. It was a company that just couldn't quite follow through with the changes that needed to get done. The first 100 days was also instructive in that I got to meet a lot of the team, and what I found was an exceptional team. It was a team that was deeply committed to the future of the company, and there was an incredible reservoir of goodwill to the business. And as you contemplate transformations at Pitney Bowes or any other place, that particular asset, the team's ability to change, the reservoir of goodwill toward the company becomes an incredible asset to your ability to make the kind of changes that you need. So we walked through the leadership team. I did probably 60 one-on-ones with different portions of the team. I walked through the labs, saw some interesting technologies. But what was most interesting was the perspectives I got from the customers. So one of the principles of transformations I learned from Lou Gerstner at IBM was they're bigger than any one person. You need to be able to find ambassadors to help you change the company and principally change the culture. So there was a meeting that the company had had. I'm not exactly sure what the purposes had been before I got there, but we changed the context of the meeting. The context of the meeting was going to be around culture, how we were going to change the culture, and we were going to start by sending everyone out, not dissimilar to the United Airlines commercial 20 years ago, to go meet with clients. We called it Operation Bear Hug, and hence this bear. And it's fascinating, this became viral within the company. As you wandered around the world, you saw all of these little bears on people's desk. And it was, to me, a great early sign that the company had the capacity, the willingness to change. I personally made probably 50 client visits in those first 100 days. And the theme was precisely the same. I'd call up someone who I knew from my previous experiences at IBM, and as you can imagine, working at IBM for 27 years, you know a fair amount of CIOs and people in the technology world, and I'd call them up and say, Don, I've joined Pitney Bowes, you're a client of ours, I'd like to come see you to get your perceptions of our company. And this pattern reoccurred over and over again. The call went something like this. Congratulations, Mark. Really glad that you landed on your feet. Really glad you're not bothering your wife anymore, but you're mistaken. We're not a client of Pitney Bowes. I said, no, you are. You use our software, you use our technology. And he said, no. I said, well, trust me, go check. So inevitably they would go check. They would take the meeting. And time after time, as I met with these clients, what they would find when they did the work with their team, and they'd have to go several levels down, we had great technology. So while we were participating in businesses that were going through secular declines, at the same time, there were these diamonds in the rough. There were these diamonds in the rough. So the charge became pretty easy, and that is, how is it you think about getting value out of these new businesses and stabilizing the core? So one of the things that I inherited at the time was a dividend that was around 10%. So we were spending about 50 or 60% of our free cash flow on dividends, which for those of you who are in the technology business of capital allocation, it's a rather unusual dynamic to be spending that much of your free cash flow on a dividend. More indicative of a company that's on some type of terminal path as opposed to a terminal future for growth. So it was pretty clear that we had to take an action around the dividend so that we provide ourselves some flexibility. What was less clear was what we were going to do with the money. So we spent 90 or 100 days trying to understand how we were going to allocate capital to help transform the company. And this was a strategy that we laid out to our analysts on May 13th of 2013. The first thing I would tell you about the strategy is it's totally unremarkable. It's totally unremarkable. If you go to IBM or to Xerox or to any of our competitors, they principally have the same strategy, and that is stabilize your core, hold on to that core as long as you can, get operationally excellent, and find the new businesses to grow to. And that strategy transcends industries. I'm on the board of Campbell Soup, another incredibly iconic company. They have a great legacy business. This time not mail, it's soup. It's soup. People are eating less soup, partly generational, partly because of concerns about health. So they're trying to hold on to their core, trying to hold on to the soup business, get operationally excellent. They call it Project Universe. At the same time, invest in what they call the perimeter of the store, which is where the organics are, the fresh foods. So the point's pretty simple. That is, any company that's trying to transform itself, they're going to have some variation of this strategy. They're going to have some variation of the strategy. So in the end, what, in my judgment, defines transformations isn't so much your strategy, it's culture. And culture is something that's much talked about, and I think very poorly understood, particularly in large companies. Lou Gerstner had an interesting observation about culture, and he came to a similar conclusion that in the end, a company's transformation was all about their culture. And Lou defined culture in a way that has stuck with me, and it was A company's culture is, in aggregate, their ability to create organizational capabilities to move the company forward. So oftentimes culture is talked about in abstract terms, kind of ethereal, conceptual. Lou's view is all about organizational capability, and I could not agree more. The second thing that I would tell you about culture is if you're going to have a strategy, your culture needs to support your strategy. So we have a saying, which we didn't invent, but we use and reuse over and over again, that strategy rides on culture. Other forms of that is culture eats strategy for lunch. But I think it kind of makes the same basic point, in that culture is incredibly important. So as I was doing the inventory of the company's culture, one of the things I did in that first 100 days is I spoke to all three of my predecessors who were alive. And I did it on consecutive days, not because I organized that way, it just happened to work out that way. I had them for lunch. And there were three of the most fascinating conversations I've had at Pitney Bowes. They were fascinating in the sense that the three of them agreed about nothing about the company. They had different views of where the company should go, different views of where the company was, different views on any topic you want to mention. Except when you ask them, as we contemplate transforming the company, what is it that you wouldn't change about Pitney Bowes? What is it that you wouldn't change about Pitney Bowes? And the predicate of the question was simple, and that is, as you contemplate transformations, one of the purposeful decisions you need to make early on is what not to change. Because if a company got to the place where Pitney Bowes did, almost 100 years old, 1999, one of the 12 prominent companies in the world that was mentioned in Jim Collins' book, they've done a lot of good things. So you're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So the two things that the three of them said shouldn't be changed about Pitney Bowes was, number one, there's the special bond between the employees and the company. And they said it in different ways, some more delicate than others, but the theme was the same: don't screw that up. Don't screw that up. The second thing they said, which kind of surprised me having come from IBM and the technology industry, was Pitney Bowes was a deeply innovative company. And that was in many ways reaffirmed by the visits I did with the clients. We had good technology. In many ways, we had leading edge technology. And I would say underneath that, there was a business model that was perhaps not well understood, but incredibly powerful. And the business model was pretty simple in that we had this great core business that, while it was going through secular decline, had barriers to entry, big switching costs, and produced a lot of cash. So if you study Warren Buffett would tell you those are the kinds of businesses that he wants to invest in. Solid, barriers to entry, provide good cash. But underneath that core business, there was a bank. So probably not many of you know that Pitney Bowes has a bank. It's around the funding of postage. It is an incredibly important part of our business model. It is an example of that kind of innovation that was very core to who the company was. So as we're contemplating culture, it was clear that innovation and the team were critical elements. But at the same time, there were other dimensions of culture which we needed to work on. The first was a client. And this is not untypical of other large, successful companies. Certainly was true at IBM. I suspect true at others. The client had become somewhat of an abstraction. And I could illustrate this to you in multiple different ways, but probably the most powerful way is when I was going through the interviews with the board, they kept on asking me, what are you going to do about client defections? What are you going to do about client defections? And it came up in all 7 conversations multiple times. So being the quick study that I am, when I joined the company, I put together a Friday morning group on what we were going to do about client defections. So I would say I was probably 6 weeks into my tenure, and all of a sudden it dawned on me what we were really talking about wasn't client defections, it was meter defections. People were using less mail meters. That's not to say we had less clients. It was a very powerful example of companies that have been remarkably successful begin to define themselves more in terms of their products than in terms of their markets. And that is an incredibly important lesson. So we needed to have a much sharper focus on our clients. The second thing about our clients is we had 1.5 million of them. 1.5 million. So I ran small and medium business inside of IBM. We had hundreds of thousands. Pitney Bowes had 1.5 million small and medium businesses around the world. They did business with the entirety of the Fortune 500. But what was also true was most of those companies had a very narrow experience with Pitney Bowes. So if they had one of our offerings, they weren't likely to have a second. So on average, those 1.5 million clients had 1.1 offerings. So one of the very simple opportunities that we had was to begin to cross-sell our products more aggressively into the install base. And the final thing that was important about our culture was we needed to redevelop that notion of winning. So in our core business, we had 75% and continue to have 75% market share in the United States. We've got 65% market share around the world. But in our businesses that we're aspiring to be in, we had 1 or 2% share. And the point was pretty simple in that the company hadn't been in a good fist fight in a while. That competitive gene that many of you wake up with in startups every day of winning, succeeding in the marketplace was there, but it was a little faint. So we began a very purposeful cultural transformation program around these 4 pillars, led by 150 people that we identified in 2013 to begin to evolve the culture to support our strategy. This was a pivotal moment for many different reasons. This was an article in the Wall Street Journal that was shortly after Analyst Day. So I like it because I could send a picture to my mom and she could see me in the Wall Street Journal. But it was an instructive moment. And I'll tell you a quick story which kind of illustrates the point. So the reporter who did the story was a woman by the name of Joanne Lubin. Do any of you know Joanne Lubin? Okay, good. So Joanne Lubin is a very powerful writer within the Wall Street Journal, very prominent. She continues to write columns. So she called Bill Hughes, as our communications guy, said, I'd like to do an article on Marc and Pitney Bowes transformation. Great, excited to do it. So we're setting up, and I'm a little nervous because this is kind of, it's a big deal. And she walks in, and she's maybe 5 foot. She's maybe 5 foot. And she's an older woman. I'm not sure precisely how old. So she wasn't exactly the image I had of a high-powered Wall Street Journal reporter. So we're setting up, and she asked me the first question. And she goes, I don't understand what Pitney Bowes does. Can you explain to me in 8 words or less what Pitney Bowes does? And I went into a very elaborate conversation about Pitney Bowes and all of our different technologies and all the different things that we did, and it was probably closer to 8 paragraphs than 8 words. And she goes, no, I want 8 words that define the essence of Pitney Bowes. So I tried again, this time to be a little more concise, but saying basically the same thing. And she stopped me halfway through. And she looked at me and she goes, what do you not understand about 8 words or less? I'm thinking, my goodness, you come to my office, you're very rude. But she made a very important and wise point, and my guess is it was pretty much on purpose, knowing Joanne and how smart she really is. Pitney Bowes had an identity crisis. And it's one thing for the new CEO not to be able to answer that question, but candidly, there wasn't any of the 30,000 employees that could answer that question concisely either. And that was a huge problem for us. So one of the things that became very clear early in my tenure is we needed to get a very clear notion of who we are and what we were going to do. This was an early interview I did with Jim Cramer, which gives you a snippet into this particular moment in time of our transformation.
What evidence is possible for companies to change their stripes and turn things around? Just take one look at Pitney Bowes. PDI 41 meters. Here's something used to major players, mail business, selling mail meters equipment that help office and postage. But obviously, that's an old-fashioned business, and paper mail is not exactly growth. And that doesn't give it to you. So Pitney Bowes had to recreate itself as an outsourced services provider under the umbrella of the U.S. postal industry. And while it's still the number one supplier of mail meters, it's also transforming itself into a digital communications company, and excitingly, including providing software for e-commerce and having a partnership with eBay that looks like it's working out great. Company's recent results have been very strong. Pitney Bowes reported a solid quarter just last week. Stock has been on a tear, down more than 140% over the past year and a half. Basically, since Marc Lautenbach took over as the new CEO. And even though the dividend was recently cut in half to give the company more flexibility to invest in its business, short of its balance sheet, stock still yields a solid 2.8%. So let's check in with Marc Lautenbach. He's the president and CEO of Pitney Bowes. Find out more about how his company's doing and where it is headed. Mr. Lautenbach, welcome to the Day of Money. Thank you so much. Have a seat. Glad to be here. Okay, now I'm trying to, when you think about the transformation, sometimes you have to start with the most, I'd say, eye-opening one, and you used it in your presentation this year, which is that people roll off the IBM mainframe where you work, and look at how all that's done. And that's what Pitney's doing.
Well, if you look at businesses as we sit here today, we've got some incredibly exciting growth opportunities. We facilitate $1 billion of e-commerce transactions each year. 1.2 billion people use our location intelligence technologies through our relationships with Twitter and Facebook. But in addition to that, we've got this great, perhaps not exciting business, but to me, a really great business around mail meters, which continues to be a very important part of our overall model. So we started off on a tear. And I use that snippet to kind of illustrate some of the things that the company does. We've got some great technology businesses, we've got great core business, but we needed to continue to evolve. Kind of look at where our share price was. Our share price went on a tear. There were a bunch of easy things to do, straightforward things to do in the transformation around inventory, receivables, some basic things to clean up. So our stock went from 10 to 27 pretty fast. And this kind of illustrates the same point. We in the first couple of years, we did a lot of things. We sold the headquarters, we cut the dividend, we sold some businesses that we've been contemplating selling. We had, changed our balance sheet, paid down a lot of debt. So we moved pretty fast out of the gates. One of the most important things we did was around our brand. So the Pitney Bowes brand had evolved over the years, and this kind of gives you a sense of the different trademarks along the way. But as I said earlier, people didn't really understand what the brand stood for. So one of the important pieces of work that we did was to define the brand, reintroduce the brand. So while we didn't come up with 8 words, we did come up with a sentence that described Pitney Bowes. Pitney Bowes is a global technology company powering billions of transactions, physical and digital. And by the way, that's something that a lot of other companies have globbed onto as well, in the connected world of borderless commerce. So that sentence kind of defined who we were, how we thought about our portfolio, how we thought about skills, how we thought about capital allocation, how we thought about businesses we participated in. One of the most important things that we did was around divestitures and acquisitions. We had a great business called Amagitas, which was around lifestyle management. So essentially when people moved, we intercepted those events and we worked with the post office to send them direct mail pieces. And one of the dirty little secrets of the industry is while there are certain classes of mail that continue to go down, overall mail volumes are flat. And direct mail in particular continues to be the most effective marketing tactic that there is. So this was a business that was around that. Great business. We had a venture capital company that came to us and said, we want that business. And I said, it's not for sale. They said, we want it. And I said, well, make me an offer because I'm a capitalist. The bottom line was it was worth more to them than it was ever going to be to us. So we sold the business. We took that money and invested in a company called Border-Free. Border-Free was a company that facilitated cross-border trade. They were the number 2 provider in the market. We were the number 1. This particular moment in time, this particular series of transactions ended up being pivotal, and I'll come back to that. We did something earlier this year that was very, very important. I'll run the tape briefly and then explain.
It's big. It's fast. It's mind-boggling. It's commerce. A world filled with complexity, compliance issues, and chaos. A world also filled with reward, growth, and great opportunity. Get it right, you win. Get it wrong, you lose. It's a borderless, hyper-connected world that is both physical and digital. To navigate and succeed in this world, a world with billions of transactions and zero tolerance for error, you need precision and accuracy. You need the skills of a craftsman. And the proven skills of Pitney Bowes. We've helped 1.5 million small businesses and over 90% of the Fortune 500 power their commerce across the physical and digital landscape. As craftsmen, we make messages unique and personal. We use data to find the best places to go do business. We take the guesswork out of sending shipments worldwide. And we help make revenue rise by delivering secure invoices and statements to the right person at the right place and time. We're 15,000 men and women around the world, creating, shaping, sharpening, refining, optimizing. That's what craftsmen do. And now, more than ever, that's what the world of commerce needs. Pitney Bowes, the craftsman of commerce.
I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to see any of those pieces. They ran heavily earlier in the year. They were really important for two reasons. First of all, it announced to the world that we were out, we were back. But the most important impact, and this was not expected, was to our own people. It told them that we weren't playing defense anymore, that we were playing offense, that we had a future. This aired on January 17th, right before the playoff games, the football playoff games. People were sitting in bars in New York City, and Pitney, it sounds strange, but it's true, Pitney Bowes employees were actually crying. And that tells you how proud they were, and they are, of the company, and how much they wanted this company to succeed. The company hadn't done any advertising at all in over 21 years. So you wonder, and by the way, if you don't know who you are, doing advertising is probably a waste. So it made sense. I won't go into this at any level of detail, but one of the changes we needed to make was our business processes were terrible. We had 37 different general ledger systems. We had 5 different CRM systems. We had 5 leasing systems. We had 3 service systems. We had 5 or 6 of everything. We had an application portfolio of 600 apps. Should have been 200. Our IT costs were twice as expensive as they should be. So there was all kinds of reasons why we needed to re-engineer our processes and put in new technology. But to me, the important part about this project was it forced every employee in the business to change. Changed how they do their jobs, and it was a great test and in many ways a metaphor for our overall capacity to change. The Commerce Cloud is something we introduced earlier in the year, and it was around a very simple concept of how it is that we take our digital capabilities and drive them into those 1.5 million businesses around the world in a digital way. So that begins to provide both the digital capability as well as the offerings to go after and provide value to our install base. We were named earlier this year as one of Forbes' great companies. I take no particular pride of that. That's something that preceded me, but again, it tells you a lot about our employee base. It's not been an easy place to work in the last couple of years. We've asked people to change. We've asked people to do a lot of hard things, but that reservoir of goodwill continues. Go through lessons learned real quick and I'll conclude. So again, most enterprises don't make this leap. If you look at the Fortune 500, 50 years ago, only 70 of those companies still exist. Transformations are not straight lines. We've had fits and starts. It is hard to predict how it is that transformations are going to evolve. Leadership ends up being incredibly important. Stakeholder management is graduate level work. You have investors, you have debt holders, you have employees, you have clients, you have communities, and how it is that you balance those, the tension between those different communities every day is hard. I'll step on this fourth point because I think it's important. If you're going to evolve, you need to evolve from a product company to market-based company. quick story to illustrate the point. I was sitting in Silicon Valley with 20 CEOs, 10 old companies like mine, 10 entrepreneurs. And it was fascinating. Entrepreneurs all talked about their products, right? Makes sense. Got a great new widget, take it to market, successful. Companies that had a longer history talked about markets because inevitably there's a shelf life to products. So as you evolve, and we're still trying to do this inside of our own company, you need to get a very clear focus on markets. Transformations are difficult. They are not for everyone. It is not something that all people want to sign up for, and culture is clearly the most defining factor. Let me conclude on this last point, which I think illustrates a lot about who we are.
The world of commerce is changing rapidly, and if you blink, if you're late, you're going to be left behind.
I'm working on mobile, big data, and social.
I work on SaaS, API management, big data, mobility.
We're creating a machine that tests all the sensors.
I'm working on doing e-commerce globally.
We always make things right. We make things fit.
I'm a UX developer.
I'm a business analyst.
I'm a product manager.
On some days I'm a mechanical engineer. On some days I'm a software engineer.
I'm a craftsman.
I'm a craftsman.
I'm a craftsman.
I'm a modern craftsman.
With craftsmen in commerce. A craftsman is a combination of an artist and a scientist.
What craftsmen do is they take all of their experience, all of their know-how, and apply it to the problem set before them.
We're crafting solutions. We're trying to figure out what parts of our technology best fit the client problem.
You can't build something that's successful without fully understanding what it is that your client needs and what your client wants.
The world of commerce needs
Accuracy, precision, trust, innovation,
code,
creativity. The world of commerce needs fearlessness.
Guts.
Readiness. Problem solvers.
The world of commerce needs Ken,
Eddie. James.
Moran.
Samantha, Conrad,
William,
Drive.
Navikia, Elaine,
Joe,
The world of commerce needs craftsmen.
Craftsman,
Craftsmen.
Craftsman.
craftsmen of commerce.
The final chapter of our transformation hasn't been written. Our stock went from 10 to 27. We're today around 17 or 18. We still have not cracked the code on consistent growth. We've got some great businesses, some that are providing great growth. One of the diamonds in the rough that I discovered early on was a little cross-border trade business. We started, it was 12 million, it's 400 million today. But all that said, there's a lot of work in front of us. The reason I know we're going to be successful is because of those people. In the end, that is your capability. So one of the things that comes very natural to you, which I would just underline, is this is all about talent. It's all about culture. I've really enjoyed my opportunity to speak with you today. Tina, congratulations on a great run. Chris, congratulations on a great event. It's been wonderful to be with you, and I wish you the very, very best. Thank you.